The sun hung low over the dusty fairgrounds, casting long shadows across the rows of gleaming motorcycles lined up like soldiers at attention. The air hummed with the low growl of engines cooling down, mixed with the chatter of families and the sizzle of burgers on grills from the charity booth. It was the annual Iron Promise ride for lost causes, funds raised for kids who'd slipped through the cracks of the system, the ones forgotten by bureaucracy and bad luck. Marcus Stonebridge Hale, president of the club, stood at the check-in table, his weathered leather vest patched with the club's emblem, an iron chain linking broken links, symbolizing bonds reforged in fire. At 55, Stonebridge was a mountain of a man, his face etched with lines from decades on the road, his graying beard framing eyes that had seen too much but revealed little. A teenage girl lingered at the edge of the crowd, her backpack slung low, fingers twisting the strap as if it were a lifeline. Rowan Pierce was 16, all sharp angles and guarded stares. Her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that did nothing to hide the faint bruise, shadowing her cheek, a mark she attributed to a fall but carried like a secret weight. She wasn't here for the ride. Her social worker had dragged her along, part of some mandatory community service gig to build character. The fairgrounds buzzed with laughter, but Rowan's world felt muffled, distant. Pressure mounted at home, or whatever passed for it these days, forms on the kitchen table, signatures demanded for some vague medical program that promised opportunities but reeked of strings attached. She scanned the bikers warily, their tattoos and scars a stark contrast to the sterile offices she knew too well. That's when her gaze locked on Stonebridge's wrist as he handed out registration stickers. Peeking from under his cuff was ink faded but deliberate. A simple date etched in bold numerals, March 14th, 2008. Rowan's breath caught. It was her birthday, the exact day she'd been born, the one she'd memorized from faded adoption papers. She stepped forward, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Excuse me," she said, voice barely cutting through the noise. "Why do you have my birth date tattooed there?" Stonebridge froze, his hand midway to the next rider's form. The sticker fluttered to the table, forgotten. Around them the world blurred, the clink of helmets, the scent of exhaust and fresh-cut grass. But his focus narrowed to this girl, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and defiance. For a split second, the unflappable president of Iron Promise cracked, his jaw tightening as memories flooded back unbidden. It had been a stormy night 15 years ago, power lines down across the backroads of Nevada. The world plunged into blackout. He'd been riding solo then, fresh off a tour that left him hollow, when he spotted a beat-up sedan swerving on the shoulder. Inside, a young woman, barely out of her teens herself, clutching her belly in agony, alone and terrified. No hospitals reachable. No phones working. Stonebridge had pulled over, his bike's headlight cutting through the rain like a beacon. He'd helped her through it. Right there in the front seat, his calloused hands steady as he followed her frantic instructions from some half-remembered first aid manual. The baby had come into the world crying, tiny fists flailing against the storm. The mother, exhausted and whispering thanks through tears, had pressed a crumpled note into his palm. Her name, the baby's, Rowan, and a plea. "If anything happens to me, watch over her, from afar, promise me." He'd nodded, sealing it with a word, because that's what men like him did, kept oaths, even when the road pulled them away. The date? He'd inked it later, a silent vow on his skin. A reminder to check in anonymously over the years. School records hacked through old contacts, glimpses from afar. But he'd never stepped closer, never intervened. Until now. The girl's question hung in the air, drawing curious glances from nearby riders. Stonebridge's composure rebuilt itself brick by brick, but inside, the tremor lingered. "Your birthday," he echoed, voice gravelly, buying time as he studied her face. the echo of that mother's features, sharper now with adolescence. Rowan nodded, pulling out her phone to show a screenshot of her birth certificate. The date, glaring back. Yeah, March 14th, 2008. Coincidence? Not exactly, he admitted, the words tasting like dust. He glanced at the crowd, signaling subtly to his vice president Jax, who approached with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd ridden through worse storms. The fairgrounds seemed to hold its breath, the charity ride's festive energy shifting to something heavier, more intimate. Stonebridge extended his wrist fully, the tattoo stark under the fading light. Long story, one that starts on a night when the world went dark. Rowan's eyes searched his, probing for lies but finding only the weight of truth. She'd come here expecting nothing, a forced outing in a sea of strangers. Instead, this biker, this stranger with her date branded on his skin, stirred something dormant. A hunger for roots, for answers beyond the forms, pressuring her to sign away control. Whispers of a private program at the clinic, vague offers of treatment tied to consent she didn't understand, had her on edge. Her guardian, more warden than family, pushed hard, but Rowan resisted, sensing the trap. Stonebridge felt the pull of that old promise tightening like a chain. Watching from afar wasn't enough anymore. This girl, marked by the same storm that had etched his life, stood before him, unknowingly calling him to account. Iron Promise wasn't just a club, it was a covenant, brothers bound by word and road. If this was the moment, he'd answer it fully, rally the crew, dig into shadows, stand as the shield she'd never known she needed. The date on his wrist burned anew, not as memory, but as mandate. As the sun dipped lower, painting the motorcycles in golden hues, Stonebridge placed a gentle hand on Rowan's shoulder. Stick around after check-in. We've got talking to do. The words carried the gravity of thunder rolling in, promising that some oaths, once voiced, demanded everything. The fairgrounds began to empty as the last riders revved their engines, a symphony of throaty roars fading into the twilight. Dust swirled in lazy eddies around the check-in table, carrying the faint tang of motor oil and charred meat from the cooling grills. Rowan hesitated, her backpack now zipped tight against her side, as if it could shield her from the uncertainty blooming in her chest. Stonebridge's words lingered like smoke, heavy and inescapable. She nodded once, sharp and uncertain, then melted into the thinning crowd, her social worker's voice calling her name from afar. But Rowan's eyes flicked back to the biker, to the ink on his wrist, that suddenly felt like a key she'd been missing. Stonebridge watched her go, his broad frame rooted like an ancient oak amid the dispersing chaos. Jax sidled up, his leather creaking softly, a question etched in the furrow of his brow. At 48, Jax was the club's steady compass, lean where Stonebridge was solid. His salt and pepper hair cropped close from years in uniform before the road claimed him. "Boss, that girl, she rattle you?" Jax's voice was low, pitched for ears only, the kind honed in foxholes and late-night runs. Stonebridge rubbed his tattoo absently, the skin warm under his thumb. "More than you know, brother. Pull the inner circle after the ride. We're digging tonight." Jax didn't press. He never did. A nod, and he was gone, weaving through the remaining bikers with purpose. The president lingered, folding the last of the registration forms, the paper crisp against his calloused fingers. The sun had surrendered to dusk, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant promises. Iron Promise's emblem on his vest caught the glow of a nearby lantern, the iron chain glinting, a reminder that some links, once broken, could be mended only through fire. Rowan found a quiet spot near the edge of the lot, perched on a weathered bench beneath a flickering bulb. The social worker had peeled off for a smoke, leaving her to the night's hush, broken only by the occasional laughter from the club's bonfire pit. She pulled out her phone, thumb scrolling through the screenshot of those consent forms again. Private Wellness Initiative, they called it, vague legalese promising enhanced care for teens in the system, but the fine print whispered of experimental trials, waivers that stripped away rights like peeling bark from a tree. Her guardian's insistence rang in her ears. "Sign it, Rowan, it's your ticket out." But the bruise on her cheek told a different story, a fresh echo of arguments that escalated too quickly. She wasn't just scared, she was cornered, the forms a noose tightening around her future. Footsteps crunched on gravel, pulling her from the screen. Stonebridge approached alone, his boots deliberate, carrying 2 steaming mugs from the refreshment tent, black coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. He handed one over without a word, settling beside her with the weight of a man unaccustomed to benches. The steam curled between them, mingling with the cool night air scented by pine from the nearby woods. "Name's Marcus Hale. Folks call me Stonebridge. You?" "Rowan Pierce." She took the mug, the warmth seeping into her palms, grounding her. Up close, he smelled of leather and faint aftershave. Not the menace she'd imagined from afar. His eyes, deep-set and shadowed, held no judgment, only a quiet appraisal, like scanning a horizon for storms. "You said it's not a coincidence," she pressed, voice steady despite the flutter in her throat. "That date. Why?" He sipped slowly, the mug's edge clicking against his teeth. The bonfire's crackle carried on the breeze, casting flickering shadows across his face, highlighting the scar that traced his jawline, a souvenir from a roadside skirmish long buried. 15 years back, Nevada backroads. Storm hit hard, power out, roads flooded. I was riding alone, clearing my head after losing too many on a deployment. His pause was deliberate, the words measured, evoking ghosts without naming them. Saw a car on the shoulder, lights failing, woman inside, young, in labor, no help coming. I stayed, helped bring you into the world. Rowan's grip tightened on the mug, coffee sloshing perilously close to the rim. The world tilted, fragments of her own hazy memories, whispers from foster files, a mother gone too soon, snapping into focus. You were there when I was born?" Her voice cracked, not with tears, but with the raw edge of revelation. The bruise on her cheek throbbed faintly, a reminder of the instability that had followed her like a shadow. Stonebridge nodded, setting his mug down on the bench with a soft thud. "Your ma, Elena. She said her name was, she was scared, fighting through the pain. After you came, wailing like a siren in that storm, she made me promise to watch over you from a distance, if she couldn't." He extended his wrist again, the tattoo a stark declaration under the bulb's glow. Inked it to remember, checked in over the years, school pics, reports through back channels, never got closer, thought that was enough. But it wasn't. Rowan's words hung, accusatory yet seeking. She leaned forward, the bench creaking under her shift. "Now what? You just appear with my birthday on your arm and poof, life's fixed." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Life ain't that simple, kid. But promises? They don't fade. I see that mark on your face, and those forms you're dodging. I know the type. Clinics pushing programs, guardians leaning hard, smells like corruption wrapping itself in help." His voice dropped, gravel turning to steel. "Iron promise. We don't ride for glory. We stand for the forgotten. Legal aid, exposure, whatever it takes to cut those strings." From the bonfire, Jax's silhouette emerged, flanked by 3 others. Lena, the club's medic with her no-nonsense braid and nurse's scrubs under her vest. Thomas, a burly veteran whose quiet strength anchored their runs. And Kira, sharp-eyed and tech-savvy, her laptop always humming with digital reconnaissance. They approached as a unit, the family's chosen rhythm evident in their synchronized steps. Stonebridge rose, gesturing Rowan to her feet. "This is the crew. We talk straight, act true. Your call, walk away or let us help unravel this." Rowan scanned their faces, illuminated by the fire's warm haze. the loyalty etched in shared glances, the unspoken code that bound them tighter than blood. The pressure of the forms, the Guardian's demands, felt smaller now, dwarfed by this unexpected alliance. She nodded, a spark igniting in her eyes. "Okay, but if you're in, you're all in." Stonebridge's hand clapped her shoulder again, firm and reassuring. As the group turned toward the fire's glow, the night air hummed with possibility, the distant rumble of a lone bike underscoring the shift. Oaths renewed didn't whisper. They roared, pulling the lost into the light. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments they reach you. The bonfire crackled like a living heartbeat, flames licking the night sky and casting elongated shadows that danced across the circle of faces. Embers spiraled upward, carried on the chill breeze that whispered through the pines, mingling the scent of burning oak with the earthy residue of the day's ride, sweat-soaked leather and cooling metal. Rowan sat cross-legged on a log, the warmth seeping into her bones, but it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. The Iron Promise crew encircled her, not as interrogators, but as sentinels, their postures relaxed yet alert, like wolves at rest but ever watchful. Stonebridge loomed at the fire's edge, his silhouette broad against the glow, arms crossed over his chest as if holding back the flood of questions. Kira leaned forward first, her laptop balanced on her knees, the screen's blue light etching sharp lines on her angular features. At 32, she was the club's digital ghost, former IT specialist turned road warrior, her fingers flying over keys with the precision of a mechanic tuning an engine. "Walk us through it, Rowan," she said, voice steady, inviting, without pressure. "These forms, what exactly are they asking?" Rowan hesitated, the mug of coffee now cold in her hands, its bitter dregs mirroring the taste in her mouth. She glanced at Stonebridge, his nod a silent anchor, then unfolded the phone's screenshot again, the firelight flickering over the text. "It's this private wellness initiative. Some clinic in the valley says it's for teens like me in the system. Offers advanced care for health issues, stuff like checkups and therapies. But the consent, it waives rights to info, lets them share records without follow-up. My guardian's been on me for days, says it's a chance for stability, maybe even adoption points." Her voice dipped, the bruise on her cheek catching the light like a faded warning. "But it feels off. Like they're rushing it, no explanations. Last night she yelled, said if I don't sign, I'm out on the street." Lena, the medic, shifted closer, her braids swinging like a pendulum. She'd patched more wounds than she could count, from bar fights to battlefield echoes, and her eyes softened with the empathy of someone who'd seen the system's cracks firsthand. Guardians like that, they leverage control. Seen it in ERs, kids pressured into programs that line pockets, not heal hearts. She reached out, not touching, but offering a steady gaze. "Any idea what's behind the clinic? Names? Docs?" Rowan shook her head, ponytail swaying. "Just Dr. Harlan's office. Vague. My social worker mentioned funding from some foundation, but she clammed up when I asked." The fire popped, sending a spark skittering toward her boot, and she stamped it out instinctively, the action mirroring the spark of resolve igniting within. Thomas grunted from his spot, his massive frame hunched forward, hands clasped like prayer. A veteran whose silence spoke volumes. He'd lost brothers to wars both foreign and domestic, and his loyalty ran deeper than the scars hidden under his sleeves. Sounds like a funnel. Clinics like that scoop up wards, test experimental edges under care. We rode for a kid last year, same setup, ended with questions buried in paperwork. His words were sparse, weighted, stirring the air with the gravity of shared battles. Stonebridge listened, his jaw set like granite, the tattoo on his wrist a faint shadow in the fire's play. Memories tugged at him, the storm-slicked car, Elena's labored breaths, the tiny cry that had pierced the thunder. He'd kept his distance as promised, wiring anonymous funds for school supplies, pulling strings through old army contacts to nudge her placements toward safer homes. But watching from afar had blinded him to the shadows closing in. This wasn't a distant vigil anymore. It was a reckoning. "We don't guess," he said finally, voice rumbling low. "Kira, run it. Everything. Clinic ties, foundation money, that Guardian's history." Kira's fingers blurred across the keyboard, the soft clicks a counterpoint to the fire's snap. Minutes stretched, the group falling into a hushed rhythm, passing a thermos of coffee that steamed like unspoken oaths. Jax paced the perimeter, his boots grinding gravel, eyes scanning the darkening lot for prying shadows. The distant hum of a highway carried on the wind, a reminder that the world spun on, indifferent to personal tempests. "Got something," Kira murmured, screen reflecting in her eyes. Clinics linked to a shell corp, Harmony Health Partners, funding traces to private donors, but whispers of grants funneled through state loopholes. Dr. Harlan, spotty record, settled complaints on consent oversights years back. And your guardian, Rowan, Margaret Voss, multiple reports, foster placements with high turnover, complaints of pressure tactics. Nothing sticks, but it's a pattern. Rowan's breath hitched, the pieces slotting like a puzzle she'd long ignored. Voss's home wasn't a haven, it was a transaction, the forms just the latest currency. "She's not family," she admitted, voice threading with vulnerability. "Just a stopover, but if I fight this, where do I go?" The question hung, pulling the crew tighter. Stonebridge knelt before her, level now, his presence a bulwark against the encroaching doubt. "You don't go alone. Iron Promise has pull, legal contacts from pro bono runs, lawyers who owe us for pulling their kin from wrecks. We'll file for temporary guardianship, advocate through the cracks, expose the program if it stinks, but it starts with truth, your word, our backs." From the shadows, Jax returned, phone in hand. Social workers circling back, text from the lot, "Wants Rowan at the van in 10. His tone carried an edge, the first ripple of external pressure. Rowan stood, resolve hardening her stance, the fire's heat flushing her cheeks. "Then we move fast. I won't sign, not without knowing." The crew rose as one, a seamless unit forged in roads and regrets. Stonebridge clapped Tomas on the shoulder, signaling the quiet giant to tail discreetly, while Lena pocketed a burner phone for Rowan, lifeline in the storm. Kira snapped her laptop shut, data secured like contraband. As they dispersed into the night, the bonfire's glow receded, but its warmth lingered in their steps, a beacon against the gathering dark. Stonebridge lingered last, watching Rowan's silhouette merge with the lot's lamps. The promise he'd inked 15 years ago pulsed anew, not a relic, but a call to arms. Leadership in Iron Promise meant more than revs and rallies. It was standing in the breach, mending what the world broke. The wind picked up, rustling leaves like whispers of warning, as the first stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses to the chain of loyalty tightening once more. Tomorrow, the ride would continue, but tonight the real journey began, into shadows where justice waited, patient and unyielding. The morning light filtered through the pines like shards of fractured glass, dappling the club's makeshift headquarters, a weathered barn on the outskirts of town, its red paint peeling like old skin. The air inside hung heavy with the aroma of fresh brewed coffee and machine oil, the latter seeping from the row of Harleys parked in the shadowed bays, their chrome dulled by overnight dew. Stonebridge paced the scarred wooden floor, boots thudding softly against the planks, each step echoing the restless churn in his gut. Sleep had been a fleeting visitor. The tattoo on his wrist itched like a fresh wound, a constant prod that the promise he'd buried under miles of road now demanded reckoning. Rowan arrived just after dawn, escorted by Thomas in his battered pickup, the engine's rumble fading into the quiet as they pulled up. She stepped out, backpack slung over one shoulder, her face pale but set, the bruise on her cheek blooming darker under the unforgiving sun. No social worker this time. She'd slipped away at first light, citing a family errand, but Kira's quick trace had confirmed Voss's van heading toward the clinic. The crew assembled around the central table, a massive slab of oak etched with years of strategy sessions, maps pinned haphazardly to the walls like battle plans. Jax leaned against a beam, arms folded, his eyes scanning Rowan with the protective vigilance of an older brother. Lena busied herself with a first aid kit nearby. Though no wounds needed tending yet, it was habit, a ritual to steady nerves. "She's en route," Kira announced, her voice cutting through the hush, laptop screen casting a sterile glow on her face. "Voss and the social worker, meeting at the clinic by 9. Our tale says Rowan's file's on the docket for review." The words landed like gravel under tires, stirring the group's quiet tension. Tomas nodded from his chair, his bulk shifting with restrained energy, while Lena's fingers paused on a bandage roll, her expression tightening. Rowan slid into a seat, the wood creaking under her slight frame. The barn's high beams creaked overhead, as if the building itself sensed the storm brewing. "They think I'm at school. I told the house monitor I had a dentist appointment." Her admission carried an edge of defiance, but her hands trembled faintly on the table's edge, betraying the fear gnawing beneath. Stonebridge stopped pacing, pulling out a chair opposite her with a scrape that silenced the room. His grey eyes locked on hers, steady as a compass in fog. "Good call, but we don't ambush blind. Kira's got the layout, back entrance, security cams looping on a timer. Jax and Thomas will shadow the meet, eyes only unless it turns." He slid a folder across the table, its contents a printout of Voss's history, flagged reports of overreach, a pattern of teens funneled into programs that vanished into red tape. This initiative, it's a web. Clinics are front for trials, off-book psych evals, meds pushed under wellness. Your consent? It green lights sharing data to who knows where. Voss gets a cut probably for delivering wards. Rowan's jaw clenched, the fire from last night flickering back to life. She flipped through the pages, the paper rustling like dry leaves in wind. She's done this before. To others like me. The question hung, laced with the raw ache of betrayal, visions of faceless kids lost in the system's grind flashing in her mind. Lena nodded, sliding a mug of herbal tea her way, chamomile to ease the knot. Seen the fallout in hospitals. Kids sign under duress, end up in loops of treatment that strip autonomy. But you're not alone now. Her voice was a balm, honed from night stitching wounds both seen and unseen. The plan unfolded in clipped exchanges, the crew's rhythm honed like a well-tuned engine. Stonebridge would front the legal angle, a call to their pro bono ally, a retired judge with a soft spot for iron promises runs. "Temporary guardianship petition," he outlined, voice gravel rough from the sleepless night. "Files it today. Cites conflict of interest with Voss. Buys time to audit the clinic." Jax would handle the tail, Tomas his shadow. Kira on digital overwatch, ready to leak traces if pressure mounted. Rowan, the linchpin, would confront Voss post-meet, armed with questions, backed by the club's unseen net. As the clock ticked toward 8, the barn stirred to life. Engines coughed awake outside. A low chorus building as more club members rolled in, veterans and road-weary souls drawn by a group text, "Ride for Rowan, eyes sharp." They weren't storming gates, but their presence wove a safety net, bikes idling like guardians at the perimeter. Stonebridge watched from the doorway as Rowan mounted the pickup with Thomas, her ponytail whipping in the breeze, resolve etching her features sharper. The clinic loomed on the valley's edge, a squat building of beige brick and tinted windows, its parking lot baking under the climbing sun. Voss's van idled out front, the social worker's sedan pulling up with a crunch of tires on asphalt. Inside, the air-conditioned lobby hummed with fluorescent sterility, the scent of antiseptic clashing with the faint, underlying tang of anxiety. Rowan waited in the pickup across the street, heart hammering against her ribs, Thomas's steady presence an anchor beside her. Voss emerged first, her face pinched, clipboard clutched like a shield. The social worker followed, murmuring assurances, but Rowan's sharp eyes caught the flicker, nervous glances, a hurried exchange of papers. When Voss spotted the pickup, her stride faltered, colour draining from her cheeks. "Rowan, what are you—" The words died as Stonebridge's truck pulled up behind, Jax dismounting with deliberate calm, his vest's emblem catching the light. "We need to talk," Stonebridge said, stepping out, his voice carrying the weight of unyielding stone. The parking lot seemed to contract, the distant highway's drone fading to a murmur. Voss backed toward the van, eyes darting. "This is official business, you can't—" "Official," Rowan cut in, sliding from the truck, her voice steady despite the quake in her knees. "Like pressuring me to sign away my rights. I know about the initiative, the payoffs. It's over." The social worker froze, papers slipping slightly as Kira's van rolled to a stop nearby, her window cracked just enough to record. Voss's facade cracked, a hiss escaping her lips. "You don't understand. It's help. Stability." But the lie rang hollow, exposed under the midday glare. Stonebridge stepped forward, not aggressive, but immovable. "Help doesn't hide in shadows. We're filing papers, guardianship transfer, clinics under review. Sign off clean, or it all unravels." His words were a quiet thunder, the crew's distant bikes a subtle underscore, engines idling like a promise of escalation if needed. The social worker paled, fumbling for her phone. "This is interference. I'll report—" But Jax's calm interjection stopped her. "Report away. We've got lawyers waiting and recordings." Tension coiled, the air thick as the sun beat down, sweat beading on brows. Voss's shoulders slumped, the fight leaching out like air from a punctured tire. "Fine, but she's trouble, always has been." The venom in her tone stung, but Rowan stood taller, the weight of the club's circle bolstering her. By noon, the papers were drafted in a nearby diner, the scent of frying bacon and coffee grounding the legal dance. Stonebridge's contact worked fast. Petition filed, Voss's authority suspended pending hearing. Rowan exhaled, the knot in her chest loosening for the first time in weeks as the crew regrouped at the barn, the victory small but seismic. Yet shadows lingered. Kira's update painted a larger web. The Foundation's ties to higher strings, whispers of institutional cover. Stonebridge rubbed his tattoo, the data compass pointing deeper. The promise expanded, not just protection, but pursuit of truth, the chosen family riding into the fray together. The afternoon sun slanted through the barn doors, gilding the Harleys in gold, as plans shifted to the next horizon. Justice wasn't a single rev, it was the long haul, chains forged in loyalty, unbreakable. If this chapter moved you, smash that like button. It fuels stories like these reaching more lost causes. The afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the barn's interior in strokes of amber and shadow, the light filtering through cracks in the walls like hesitant spotlights on a stage set for confrontation. Dust motes swirled in the beams, disturbed by the low murmur of voices and the occasional clink of tools as club members tinkered with their bikes outside, the rhythmic ping of wrenches a counterpoint to the tension coiling within. Stonebridge stood at the head of the oak table, his fingers tracing the edges of the guardianship petition, freshly stamped, a fragile shield against the storm. The paper crinkled under his touch, carrying the faint scent of printer ink and diner coffee, a reminder of the morning's hard-won ground. Rowan sat nearby, her backpack discarded at her feet like shed armor, but her posture remained guarded, shoulders hunched as if bracing for the next blow. The herbal tea Lena had brewed earlier sat untouched, its steam long faded, mirroring the cooling resolve that had carried her through the clinic standoff. Kira's laptop hummed softly on the table, screens flickering with encrypted files and red-flagged connections, the glow casting ethereal patterns on the group's faces. Jax leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, while Thomas occupied a corner chair, his massive form still as a sentinel statue. "We've bought time," Stonebridge said, his voice a low rumble that filled the space without overwhelming it. "Petitions in, Voss is sidelined for the hearing, but that clinic, it's not backing down quiet." He nodded to Kira, who tapped a key, pulling up a grainy security feed from the clinic's lot, time-stamped just after their departure. Voss's van lingered, the social worker pacing beside it. Phone pressed to her ear, her gestures sharp and urgent. A second figure emerged from the building, a man in a crisp white coat, mid-40s, his face obscured by the angle but his stride purposeful, exuding the clipped efficiency of authority unchallenged. Rowan's eyes narrowed, the bruise on her cheek a dull ache under the barn's warm light. "Dr. Harlan," she murmured, recognition threading her words with ice. He was the one pushing the forms last visit, said it was routine, like I was just another file. The memory surfaced unbidden. The sterile exam room, the doctor's pen hovering over her chart, his assurances laced with a salesman's polish that had set her teeth on edge. Kira zoomed the feed, the pixels sharpening to reveal Harlan, slipping an envelope into Voss's hand. Thick, sealed, the exchange quick as a sleight of hand. "Bribe or payoff," Kira confirmed, her voice clinical, fingers pausing on the keys. "Traced a wire from the Foundation to Voss's account this morning. $5,000, time-stamped post-confrontation. They're scrambling to plug leaks." Jax pushed off the wall, his boots scraping the floorboards. Scrambling means they're exposed, but if they pull strings higher, state oversight, maybe even the Foundation's board, we're looking at pushback. Hearings get delayed, guardianships contested. His gaze flicked to Rowan, softening the edge in his tone. "You holding up, kid?" She met his eyes, the vulnerability from the fire pit night tempered now by a budding steel. Better than expected, but Voss, she looked scared out there, not just mad, like she knows something bigger's at play. The admission hung, stirring the air with unspoken fears. The web Kira had uncovered stretched beyond one clinic, tendrils linking to policy loopholes that funneled vulnerable teens into programs disguised as aid. Whispers of data sold to private firms, experimental protocols buried in consent fine print, all under the guise of wellness. Lena rose from her spot by the first aid kit, crossing to Rowan with a small vial of salve, her movements deliberate and maternal. "Fear's a two-way street. Use it." She dabbed the cream gently on the bruise, the cool mint scent cutting through the barn's oily haze. "I've seen docs like Harlan in the field, charm on the surface, but they're guardians of gates, not healers. If we expose the pattern, it crumbles." Stonebridge absorbed it all, the weight of leadership pressing like the vest on his shoulders. The tattoo on his wrist caught a stray beam of light. The date, March 14th, 2008, a silent accusation. He'd promised Elena to watch from afar, a vow born in storm and isolation, but distance had become complicity. Now, with Rowan here, flesh and fire, the oath demanded more, not just protection, but the dismantling of the machine that had shadowed her life. Memories flickered, Elena's final whisper in that rain-lashed car, her hand weak but fierce on his arm. "Keep her free." He'd nodded then, sealing it in ink and intent, but freedom wasn't passive. It was a ride through fire. "Next move," he decided, voice steadying the room. "Kira, deep dive on Harlan, patient logs, complaints, anonymized through our network. Jax, Thomas, canvass the valley quiet. Talk to other wards. See if the initiatives touch them. He turned to Rowan, his expression opening like a road unfolding. You, we get you safe quarters here tonight. No more Voss roofs, and tomorrow we prep your statement for the hearing, truth as armor. Rowan nodded, the salves tingle a small comfort against the larger chill. The barn felt less like a hideout now, more like a fortress, its walls echoing with the club's quiet solidarity. Outside, engines revved sporadically, brothers arriving for the evening watch, their headlights sweeping the drive like lighthouses in fog. She thought of the form she'd burned in her mind, the waivers that promised care but delivered chains, and felt a spark of agency ignite. This family, chosen in leather and loyalty, had pulled her from the edge. Now she'd stand with them. As dusk settled, the group dispersed into tasks, the barn alive with purpose. Stonebridge stepped outside alone, the gravel crunching under his boots, the cooling air carrying the pine-scented breeze from the woods. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face, scars and all, before exhaling a plume that twisted toward the stars. The road had taught him redemption wasn't a destination, but a daily grind. Oaths kept through sweat and scars. Eleanor's plea echoed in the wind, urging him onward. Iron Promise wasn't just a club. It was the bridge he'd build, link by link, from past shadows to a future unchained. Yet as he watched the horizon, a distant rumble caught his ear. Not thunder, but the low growl of approaching vehicles, headlights piercing the twilight like probing eyes. Jax appeared at his side, hand on his holster instinctively. "Company," Jax muttered, tension threading his words. "Not ours." Stonebridge crushed the cigarette under his heel, the ember dying with a hiss. The Promise's fire burned brighter now, drawing foes as surely as allies. The night deepened, the barn's lights a defiant glow, as the convoy crested the rise. Clinic security, perhaps, or Foundation muscle, come to test the chain's strength. Whatever came, they'd meet it head-on, the chosen family's roar rising to match. The gravel drive crunched like brittle bones under the weight of the approaching convoy, headlights slicing through the deepening dusk like accusatory fingers. Stonebridge's hand instinctively dropped to his belt, fingers brushing the cool metal of his buckle, not a weapon, but a reminder of the club's code. Stand firm, but never draw first. The rumble grew, a pack of black SUVs cresting the rise, their tinted windows reflecting the barn's defiant lights like voids. Jax tensed beside him, his breath steady but his stance widening. A silent signal rippling through the shadows, where Thomas and two other riders melted into position, engines off but ready. Inside the barn, the air thickened with the scent of oiled leather and anticipation, the low hum of Kira's laptop fading as she snapped it shut. Rowan rose from the table, her chair scraping back with a sharp protest, heart pounding in sync with the encroaching growl. Lena placed a hand on her arm, firm and grounding, the medic's touch carrying the quiet assurance of battlefields past. "Stay behind the line," Lena murmured, her voice a thread of calm woven through the rising pulse. The group's rhythm shifted seamlessly, doors creaking open, boots thudding as more Iron Promise members emerged from the bays, vests glinting under the floodlights, forming a loose perimeter without a word spoken. Loyalty didn't need commands, it moved like the tide. The lead SUV halted 20 yards out, its engine idling with a predatory purr, dust settling in lazy clouds around the tires. The driver's door swung open, and Dr. Harlan stepped into the fading light, his white coat discarded for a tailored jacket that screamed boardroom over bedside. Flanked by two burly figures in dark suits, security, their bulk straining against ill-fitting fabric. He adjusted his tie, the gesture precise, almost rehearsed. Behind him, Voss hovered in the second vehicle, her face pale through the glass, eyes darting like a cornered animal, No sirens, no badges. This was off-book pressure, the kind that whispered threats in parking lots and vanished complaints in files. "Mr. Hale," Harlan called, his voice smooth as polished stone, carrying across the gap without amplification. He stopped at the perimeter's edge, the club's silent wall of riders holding firm, their shadows merging into one unbroken front. "A word, this doesn't concern you." Stonebridge stepped forward alone, his boots deliberate on the gravel, closing half the distance without crossing into Harlan's space. The evening chill nipped at his skin, carrying the faint metallic tang of exhaust from the SUVs. Up close, Harlan's face revealed cracks, fine lines around his eyes from too many late-night audits, a tightness in his jaw that betrayed the facade. "Everything about that girl concerns us now," Stonebridge replied, his tone even, gravel rough but laced with unyielding steel. "Guardianships filed. Your program's under the light. Walk away clean." Harlan's smile didn't reach his eyes, a calculated curve that chilled more than the dusk. He glanced at the barn, where Rowan's silhouette flickered in the doorway, Thomas's bulk a shield beside her. Temporary papers, easily contested. The initiative helps these children. Structure, care they wouldn't get otherwise. Rowan's case is delicate. She's unstable, a risk. Sign her back over and we avoid complications. The word hung, weighted with implication. The Foundation's reach, strings pulled in quiet offices to bury petitions like theirs. Rowan's voice cut through from the barn's threshold, sharp and unbroken. "Unstable. That's what you call fighting your lies?" She stepped into the light, Lena at her side, the salve's mint lingering faintly on her skin. The bruise shadowed her cheek like a badge now, not a shame. "I saw the envelope, the money. Voss isn't helping, she's selling." Voss spilled from the SUV then, her clipboard abandoned, hands wringing as she approached Harlan's flank. The wind tugged at her coat, exposing the tremor in her frame. "Rowan, please, it's not like that. The doctor." He explained. Stability, a home. But her eyes betrayed her, flicking to Harlan with the desperation of a debtor. The $5,000 in her account, a chain she'd forged herself. Jack shifted subtly, his position blocking the drive, while Kira's voice whispered from a concealed earpiece in Stonebridge's vest, low, urgent. "Feeds live. Recording everything. Foundation's board just pinged. Emergency call logged. They're spooked." The digital ghost's work wove invisible threads, turning this standoff into evidence, pixels that could unravel empires. Harlan's composure frayed, his hand rising in a placating gesture that felt more like a ward against the encroaching dark. "This is interference in medical affairs. The state will hear of it. Your little club meddling in welfare." But the threat rang hollow, undercut by the club's unblinking stares, the quiet solidarity that spoke of roads traveled and oaths unbreakable. Stonebridge felt the pull of Elena's promise thrumming in his veins, the tattoo on his wrist a compass, pointing not to retreat, but to revelation. He'd watched from shadows too long. Now the light he cast would expose the rot. "Meddling?" Stonebridge echoed, stepping closer, his presence filling the space like a gathering storm. "We call it justice. For Elena's daughter. For every kid you funneled into your web." The name dropped like a stone in still water, rippling across Harlan's face. Recognition, then a flash of something darker, buried knowledge surfacing. Voss gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, the pieces of her patchwork life threatening to tear. Harlan recovered, but slower now, his eyes narrowing. "You have no proof. Walk away, or your guardianship crumbles before dawn." The security men tensed, hands hovering near jackets, but the club's perimeter held, a living chain of iron promise, veterans who'd faced worse than suits in the night. Rowan met Harlan's gaze across the divide, her voice steady, forged in the fire of reclaimed roots. "Proof's coming. All of it." The words ignited something in the air, A spark that promised escalation, the chosen family's loyalty turning whispers into a roar. The doctor hesitated, the convoy's engines humming like held breaths. Harlan signaled retreat with a curt nod, the SUVs reversing slowly, taillights bleeding red into the twilight. Voss lingered a beat longer, her eyes locking on Rowan's, pleading, then broken, before sliding back into the van. The door slamming like a finality. The rumble faded down the drive, leaving only the wind's sigh and the barn's steady glow. Stonebridge exhaled, the tension uncoiling but not dissolving, a residue lingering like smoke. He turned to Rowan, his hand on her shoulder, a bridge across years. They'll push harder now, but we've got the high ground, truth and time. The crew regrouped, voices low as they filtered back inside, plans sharpening like blades on whetstone. Kira's laptop reopened, threads pulling tighter toward the hearing, the Foundation's underbelly exposed inch by inch. As night fully claimed the sky, stars wheeling overhead like distant allies, Stonebridge stood watch once more. The promise that had started in a storm-swept car now spanned a brotherhood, a girl's redemption and a war against shadows. Harlan's retreat was no victory but a foothold, the road ahead twisted, demanding every ounce of honor to navigate. Iron links held, unyielding, as the horizon beckoned with the dawn of reckoning. The stars hung like scattered iron filings across the velvet expanse, their cold light filtering through the barn's open doors as the night deepened into a hush, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant call of an owl. Stonebridge lingered on the threshold, the gravel still warm under his boots from the day's sun, the retreating tail lights of Harlan's convoy now mere memories swallowed by the horizon. The air carried a crisp edge, laced with the lingering bite of exhaust and the earthy promise of dew-kissed pines. Inside, the crew's voices wove a low tapestry, Kira's keyboard clicking like Morse code, Jax's measured directives to the perimeter riders, Lena's soft reassurances to Rowan as she applied a fresh compress to her cheek, the minty salve now a ritual of care rather than crisis. Rowan sat at the oak table, her fingers tracing the guardianship petition's embossed seal, the paper's texture rough against her skin, like the road she'd just begun to travel. The bruise had faded to a shadow, but the fire in her eyes burned brighter, tempered by the club's unyielding circle. Tomas loomed nearby, his silence a bulwark, while the faint glow of lanterns cast elongated shadows that danced like guardians on the walls. The confrontation had cracked the facade, but victory demanded follow-through. The hearing loomed at dawn, a courtroom arena where truths would clash like revving engines on an open stretch. "They're rattled," Kira said, breaking the rhythm, her screen illuminating the web she'd unraveled overnight. Harlan's patient logs, anonymized but damning. Dozens of teens funneled into the initiative, consents signed under duress. Data trails leading to shadowy firms peddling insights for profit. Her voice held the quiet triumph of a puzzle solved, fingers pausing to sip from a thermos of black coffee, its steam curling like unspoken resolve. Leaked it to our contacts, pro bono journalists, oversight watchdogs. By morning it'll hit the wires, no more shadows. Jax nodded from his post by the door, his salt and pepper hair catching the light, the lines on his face etched deeper by the night's vigil. Perimeters clear, but expect ripples, Foundation lawyers circling. We ride in force to the courthouse, eyes open. His words carried the weight of shared roads, the club's emblem on his vest a glint of solidarity, reminding Rowan that family wasn't born in bloodlines, but forged in firelit councils and midnight stands. Stonebridge turned from the doorway, his broad frame filling the space as he crossed to the table, boots thudding softly on the planks. The tattoo on his wrist gleamed faintly under the lantern's glow. March 14th, 2008, a date no longer a distant echo but a living mandate. Elena's face flickered in his mind, her storm-weary eyes trusting him with her daughter's future. A plea whispered amid thunder and new life. He'd honored it from afar, a spectator to Rowan's trials. But the road had twisted, demanding presence over promises etched in ink. Leadership in Iron Promise meant bridging the gaps the world ignored, mending chains with hands scarred by time. He placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder, the gesture firm yet gentle, calluses rough against her jacket. "You ready for this? Courtroom's no fairground, but truth cuts deeper than any gavel." His voice rumbled low, gravel honed by decades of oaths kept and losses mourned, eyes meeting hers with the steady depth of a man who'd stared down worse horizons. Rowan looked up, the vulnerability of the fire pit night now alloyed with steel, her ponytail swaying as she straightened. "Ready, Voss, Harlan. They built their web on lies, but you showed up. That's more than I've had." The words bridged the years between them, a quiet acknowledgement of roots unearthed. The mother's vow pulling them into orbit like gravity long denied. Dawn broke with a blush of rose across the valley, the sun cresting the pines as the convoy assembled. A phalanx of Harleys gleaming like polished armor, engines coughing to life in a symphony of throaty roars that scattered birds from the treetops. The air hummed with purpose, the scent of fresh oil and dew mingling with the faint char of last night's bonfire embers. Stonebridge led the ride, Rowan in the sidecar of his vintage rig, her backpack secured like a talisman, wind whipping her hair as they carved through the morning mist. Jax and Thomas flanked them, Lena and Kira in the truck trailing with files and laptops. The chosen family, a rolling testament to loyalty's roar. The courthouse loomed in the town square, its stone facade stark under the climbing sun, flags snapping in the breeze like signals of battles past. Reporters milled at the steps, drawn by the leaks, headlines whispering of scandals in the initiative, foundations crumbling under scrutiny. Voss arrived disheveled, her eyes hollow, avoiding Rowan's gaze as she shuffled inside, Harlan absent, but his shadow lingering in the prosecutor's hurried whispers. The hearing unfolded in a chamber of polished wood and echoing footsteps. The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, presiding like a sentinel over the fray. Stonebridge testified first, his voice steady as he recounted the storm-born promise. Elena's plea woven into the narrative without dramatics, just raw truth that hung in the air like exhaust trails. Watched from afar as sworn, but distance failed her. Now, I stand present. Rowan's statement followed, her words clear and unyielding, the bruise a silent exhibit as she detailed the pressures, the form's hidden barbs, the web of coercion. Kira's evidence sealed it. Digital trails, witness accounts from other wards, the envelope's exchange frozen in pixels. The gavel fell by midday, the chamber's light slanting through high windows like benediction. Guardianship granted to Iron Promise's trust, Voss's authority revoked. The initiative suspended pending full probe. Harlan's name topped the indictments, the Foundation's board scattering like leaves in a gale. Rowan exhaled in the hallway, the weight lifting like fog burned away. Stonebridge's arm around her shoulders, a bridge to the life ahead. Foster no more, but claimed by the road's embrace. As the convoy revved back toward the barn, the sun high and unyielding, Rowan glanced at Stonebridge's wrist, the tattoo now a shared emblem. "You kept it," she said over the wind, voice carrying the warmth of dawn, the promise. He nodded, throttle steady, the horizon unfolding endless. "And I'll keep it still. Family's not a word, it's the ride." The engines thrummed in unison, chains of loyalty linking past to present, redemption's roar echoing into the light. Shadows fled, honor's legacy etched not in ink but in the miles ahead. Thank you for riding this journey with us to the end. If these tales of promise and perseverance touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and join the Iron Promise family. We've got more roads to travel together.